Good morning, everyone. So today, the 25th of Tevis, is my grandmother's third yahrzeit, my father's mother. So we'll dedicate the learning in her memory. Chasya Bas Isser. She was a woman who loved learning, actually. And was good at it, too. Okay. So if we look at our booklets and we turn this, go to the centerfold and turn 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where we are. The first line should begin with the word Hagam. And we are in the middle of the page, where the paragraph begins with the Afalpi. So as we mentioned at the end of last week, we're kind of doing a bit of a reset now, going back to like almost first principles and re-examining, but now in light of everything we learned. So let's bring us where we are. The last thing we had was somewhat of a recap of everything we've been talking about, which is resolving the quote-unquote problem of multiplicity emerging from singularity. Right? The singular absolute truth, not defined by anything, not defined by components, doesn't contain anything descriptive, the way we contain things that are descriptive, and yet there's multiple different things that produce from it. So why would singularity produce, or how can singularity produce multiplicity? The multiplicity that I produce is because I contain multiplicity in me. I contain intelligence, I contain emotions, I contain all kinds of intelligence, all kinds of emotions, and then I have the ability to move my hands, to walk, to talk, and so on. So all these various different abilities come out in combination in the various different things that I produce. So it appears that because I am a complexity, therefore I can produce multiplicity. But if God is a singularity, non-complex, not comprised of any units, why is it producing multiplicity? And what we left off with last week, which is something that we reviewed really in different language, different ways over the last couple of weeks, the last however long we've been doing this, is that the difference is in the recipients. And the most recent analogy we gave was the way heat yields different results, or fire yields different results depending on who's receiving that fire. So if you put it under an egg, it's going to harden. If you put it under ice, it's going to melt. Here it's going to cause something to turn black. Here it's going to cause something to turn white. But the essence of the fire is just to produce heat. It just so happens to be that depending on the recipient of that heat, the result would be different. So there's like an analogy, amongst many others, the light and the vessels, all the various different analogies to make the same point, that something can be singular in its output, but if the recipients are different, then the outcome is different based on the recipients. It doesn't change the singularity of the center. Yeah? Okay. But this is all after a lengthy explanation to understand all of this, right? But the real thing we haven't really resolved yet is, which is what we're trying to work towards, is where do those recipients come from? Right? Because God produces the light, the energy that's undefined, and then these recipients, the vessels, can make the definition. And where do those things come from? So what we got so far was that God condenses himself into these definitions. Okay? We have to understand what that means, that God condenses himself into anything. So to get there, the Tzemach Tzedek now takes us back to like the first principle. And we began alluding to it at the end of last week, which is the whole problem doesn't seem to be a problem. The problem that singularity can produce multiplicity is only a problem that we're imposing on it because of the way we experience singularity. Because we, in our world, things only produce that which it contains. And therefore we say, God being singularity shouldn't be producing multiplicity. We're imposing our version of creation onto God. Why can God create things he doesn't contain? We don't produce anything unless we contain it. Great. So therefore God can't produce something because he doesn't contain it? Because he doesn't contain multiplicity, therefore multiplicity can't come from him? Since when? So we're almost going back to like the original question and asking like first principles, like, why the question? And in that asking why the question will come to the deepest, truest answer to how indeed multiplicity comes from the singularity. Okay, so let's begin. And that will answer how we have the vessels, which is really the multiplicity. The multiplicity is the vessels. So the light produces, and the vessels can make the various definitions. But how do we get those definitions? How do we get those vessels? That's going to be resolved when we go back to this question of why is there a question to begin with. Okay? So let's read inside and see how the Tzemach Tzedek puts that.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
It's basically how can a singularity have this concept of creates, because the common create is already
Plurality. Yeah. It's already plurality, correct.
So that
certainly creation as we know it, yeah.
But the moment you use any kind of something, it's no longer
correct. Correct.
So
correct. That is right. So that's the question we've been having, and now we're going to ask why that's even a question. All right, so now let's see it's Tzemach Tzedek's words in the inside. Even though Shebe'emes, in truth, we have to examine our first principle. Yesh Laimar, we can suggest Shakushya Mikar Dedina, our original primary question. How could multiplicity be produced from singularity? Eina Kushya Klal is not a question at all. It's a false premise to even ask the question. Rotzo Laimar, what I mean to say here is like this. Masha Hikshu, that which has been asked. How could multiplicity be produced from the absolute singular truth? That question seemingly isn't even a question. Why is that? Because the preconceived idea, haimeres, that dictates that something which is singular can only produce further singularity. That premise, which is the premise of our question, singularity shouldn't be producing multiplicity, because singularity can only produce singularity. That's the premise of our question. Says it's Tzemach Tzedek, that premise is only true with dvarim hativim, in natural entities, she'ein lam b'chira b'palasam, that don't have free choice in their activity, and they can only act in accordance with the nature they've been granted. When things are limited to acting based on the nature that they are granted, then you can ask, how could A produce B? Because A doesn't contain B. That's only if A is trapped in the nature of being A, which is the way we experience everything. Everything is trapped in its nature, and it can only produce that which is contained in its nature, predetermined nature, imposed on it from somewhere else. The nature that I am to be human is not something I adopted. I don't have choice in that. It's something that's imposed on me. Now that it's imposed on me, my choice is, what of my humanity am I going to produce? Fine. But I can only use the tool that had already been pre-granted to me. Right? And it's based on that we ask, well, how could singularity produce plurality? Singularity doesn't have the tools for plurality. That whole question is only if we take the premise that God is somehow stuck into some nature that's imposed on it that has to be singularity. Who's making that imposition on him? We have such impositions. So the premise of the question seems to be faulty, is what Tzemach Tzedek is telling us.
The definition of singularity from our perspective.
From our perspective. Because our perspective is that which is defined by something cannot produce something that it isn't defined by. That's our perspective, as he says. So, Ella, rather, these things, everything that we know of that has a particular nature, poilim, and has no choice in that nature, it's just made that way. Poilim, they act, kitivan, shebiva habayder. They act in accordance with the nature that has been granted to them by the Creator. Everything. And therefore, something that's only been granted one singular nature will only produce in commensurate to that one singular nature. So let's just say, he's going to give an example in a second, but I was going to give a different, let's say the sun. The sun has only been granted one particular nature, the production of UV rays. That's the nature that's been granted. It will never produce anything else. Setu. That's all it's been granted. So the limitation that the sun has to only produce UV rays is not because it's some ethereal singularity and therefore it's only going to produce singular. It's because singularity has been imposed on it and therefore it's only going to produce singularity. Because all it is a producer of UV rays. I'm not going to do anything else. That's all it has. Right?
But the sun is not a singular thing. The sun is made up of different things. And we've given it. You've taken it multiple times and created.
We're using the example we gave. Okay, let's use the example we gave before, which was the fire, right? The example we gave was the fire produces only heat, and the recipients change the result of that heat, right? Now, why is it that the fire can only produce heat?
Because it was granted.
Because it's been granted, finished. It's a limitation on it. So to say that therefore God can produce only God can only produce singularity, and multiplicity becomes because of the vessels, you're taking a standard that exists in our world and applying it to God. That's not fair. You can't do that. There is no nature that exists outside of God that's imposed on God that says you can only produce what you have. There's no such thing. On the fire, there is such a thing, because God granted fire heat, and that's all it's ever going to produce. Right? So I've been granted more layers of complexity. Great, so I can produce more than fire, because I've been granted more layers of complexity. That doesn't change the fact that I'm only producing that which I've been granted from the outside, imposed on me. Not that I'm choosing them. I'm not choosing those. I'm not choosing my limitations. I'm using my limitations to the best of my capacity, pushing them, hopefully. But I'm not choosing my limitations. Right? Sorry?
Question.
Yep.
And certainly don't answer if I'm taking you back from last week. It's fine, but knowing from creation and knowing from the book of Bereshit what creation was all about, why was this even a question that we had to even look into?
It's a philosophical conundrum.
I understand.
Right?
But that philosophical conundrum shouldn't even, in my brain, simple brain, shouldn't even be questioned because the singularity did produce the multiplicity.
Okay, good.
So.
Okay, very good. So it goes back to the beginning, which is like, what's the difference between what is it that we know and what is it we have faith in? So what can we know? What can we understand? So asking these questions will help us know what we can know and what we have to accept on faith. So, right, it goes back to what we talked about way back, how we're constantly trying to push the limits of what we can understand.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing now. Okay, can we understand how singularity produces plurality? And now what we're saying is...
questioning Hashem's...
No, it's questioning how we understand it, right?
Okay.
So, not questioning Hashem's ability. It's questioning how we understand it. So till now we understood it as Hashem is a singular force and the multiplicity comes from the recipient. And that way we're like quote unquote, we're protecting the integrity of God's singularity. That's what we've been doing till now. Protecting the integrity of God's singularity by saying he remains singular and the vessels can create the multiplicity. But now that we've entered into the realm where, okay, that the vessels that make the multiplicity are also him, so now we have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, so he is producing multiplicity. So did we lose the singularity now? And that's what we're addressing. We're addressing that by saying, your problem that singularity can't produce plurality is a faulty premise. Because that is only true if the singularity is imposed on him. And he's trapped in being singular and can't produce anymore. Which is obviously not true. Let me put it this way. The choices that we have are the choices to use the tools being given to us. That's our choice. We did not choose the tools. I'm never going to run as fast as a cheetah. I wasn't granted those tools, and I'm not going to swim like a fish. The tools I have is what I'm choosing between. Hashem is not choosing to use the tool of his creative capacity. He's choosing to even have a tool called creative capacity. Deeper than that. He's not choosing to use the tool, in which case he's limited by what can this tool produce.
He makes a tool.
He makes the tool, exactly. So the whole notion that he can't create because he's only singular is to assume that he has this tool called singularity that he can't use beyond singularity. What? He chose that tool. And here he chooses tools of multiplicity. Right? And now we have the solution to where the multiplicity came from, not just in the light, but in the vessels themselves. Because the same way he can choose to manifest a singular light, he can choose to manifest a plurality. He's not trapped in either of those. This is where we're going. Right? And this all comes after all our lengthy explanation of the difference between singularity and plurality and so on. We go back to the beginning and drawing board and say, okay, why do you have a problem to begin with? He can do whatever he wants. And now that we understand all that, we can appreciate God being in everything because it all comes down to his choice of what he wants to manifest. And not just his choice to use the tool that he has. No. It's a choice to even have a tool. Period.
God created nature, and we think in terms of nature, so why would
he be stuck in that nature?
If he's the one
Correct.
who created nature in the first place, like everything, if he's above all of that,
That's right.
and he can't be limited to it. It's
The mind-
scientifically impossible to be inside your creation. Like what I mean is to be stuck. You can be there, but you also have to be outside. Or you
The
couldn't
mind-blowing
be in
thing
the
here
first place.
is it's not just that God creates whatever he wants. It's that God chooses to be a creator. He's not stuck being a creator. If he was stuck being a creator, then he can only create with the tools of creative ability. But he's not, my father always says this, he's not a creator, he's the creator. He decided to create. He doesn't have to be a creator.
And also, we don't always call him a creator, we call him different names.
Precisely. And so Chassidus talks about this, that rationally, okay, we're going a little off topic, but this is also to your point. Rationally speaking, the relationship with God is only as creator. Because you look at the world and you work your way back to a singular center. We spoke about this way back at the beginning, right? That there's the rationale of getting back to a singular center. But now we're pushing the limits of that and saying, well, okay, where did that singular center come from? So there must be something that's beyond being creator that chooses to be creator. And that's already on faith. You can't rationally deduce that from anything, because it's beyond being anything related to anything. Even beyond being this idea of the singular creator.
It's half
Following?
belief and half like science, because
That's what we're doing.
scientifically you cannot.
That's right. We're straddling
you
the.
cannot be restrained by your own creation.
Right. So we're straddling the line between what we have faith in, what we know. Right. So, okay, you said scientifically you can't be constrained by your own creation, but you are constrained by your creative tools, where Hashem is not. That's the big difference. He's not just, God's not constrained by his creation. He's not even constrained by his creative tools, because even those creative tools are chosen. Whereas for me, my creative tools are not chosen. I am constrained by my creative tools, because they weren't chosen by me. They were given to me, and that's my definition.
Well, because
Done.
Again, we have to use the word create because we don't have anything else. But the fact that he created the tools and created the nature and everything, so he can't be bound by
Even by the creative tools,
Even
precisely.
by the creative, I'm saying, but it's
Exactly
the
right.
same logic. I'm saying that is an
Correct.
actual logic conclusion.
Correct.
And to believe is something.
So it's
else.
that's right. So it's a logical conclusion that there's this which is beyond what we can possibly understand.
Right.
Again, back to the point, we're pushing the limits of what we can understand, accepting that which is beyond. Okay, so let's see. Yeah.
Even though he chooses to use words.
Right. Which I was saying last week. At the end, what we end up doing is not explaining why God did what he did, thank you. But we reverse engineer. Based on what we have, we know this is what he must have done. Could he have done it a different way? Of course he could have done it a different way. Who cares? He could have done it a trillion ways. Endless ways, actually. Literally endless ways he could have done it. But considering what we have, this is what the process must have been. And that's the process of getting to know God. The process you chose by which to create. By working through what we have in reality.
And find again how so we're not any closer. We actually can appreciate it much better just by. We're nowhere closer.
That's what we're going to get to.
Appreciate more.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. We're going to get to that as well. Yes, very good. Okay, so let's top of the left side. So we're going back to this idea that the premise is based on the premise of the question, how could plurality come from singularity, is based on the fact that everything can only produce based on what it has. Therefore, and therefore, the fact that fire causes some things to cook, some things to melt, some things to harden, which are distinct results, but the fire is is only a singular power, the ability to make heat, and that was like the beginning of the problem, that you can only produce one thing, and the results of differences must be in the recipients, not in the actual producer. Right? Because the producer, the fire, only has heat. And that kind of gave us this problem. How could God of singularity create multiplicity? Right? So and we explained that the differences are because of the recipients. That they are predetermined to change and react to the fire in different ways. This one's going to melt. This one's going to harden. Through the singular power of heat. Right? But by contrast, as far as the actual fire itself goes, it only produces one thing called heat. Because that's its nature. It doesn't have any choices mentioned above. Fire doesn't have a choice to choose. The reason why fire is causing this to melt and that to become hardened, it's not because the fire is choosing that should melt and that should become hard. It doesn't have any choice at all, actually. It just produces heat. That's all it is. And the recipients cause a difference in the result. But Hashem Yisbarach, the Holy One, blessed be He, Shu Echad Ames, is absolute oneness. Upayel baratin mabchira, and everything He does, and everything that He is by choice and by His own volition. So there are no constraints, not physical, not metaphysical, not theoretical, not conceptual, that can prevent Him from doing or acting out in any regard. Not even His own singularity. Right? So even though He remains one absolute simplicity, He can actually invest in distinction. And not just the distinction being the result because of the recipients, like by fire. In fire, the results is not in the fire, the distinction is not in the fire, but in the recipients. Here, Hashem Himself can be the distinctions. Because why not? Who told him no? What nature is imposed on God that says He can't be in distinction? Nothing. Right? And even if you were going to suggest somehow that a singularity cannot produce anything but singularity, even if he's acting out willingly by his own choice, right? That would only be true because that singularity is stuck in the definitions of the category called singularity. And then you could say, singularity can't produce anything but singularity. And therefore that would separate him from being something else. He's singular, not multiple. But God being one is not one because he is one and not multiple. That's not what God's oneness is. If you said God's oneness is that he's one and not multiple, you just put a limitation on God. So what do we mean when we say he's one? What we mean is, when we say that God is one, it's not because he's one in contrast to anything else, but he's one in contrast to being defined at all. So it's a very different kind of singularity. The singularity of fire is a definitional singularity. It's defined by a singularity called heat. God's singularity is not by definition. It's by lack of definition. Because it has no definitions, therefore it's one. The fire's singularity, heat, is not because it lacks no definition. It's very much defined. There is an imposed definition called heat, and thus it's stuck in the singular definition. Hashem's singularity is not because he's stuck in the defined singularity, but because he isn't defined by anything. Therefore he's singular. Not because he's stuck in singularity. Because he isn't defined by anything, therefore we say singular. Not because he's stuck in some singular model.
But to get technical, even heat for us can be defined different ways.
Right.
I'm just saying...
Yeah, that's right. The analogy will always fail because we don't have any singularity at all in our world.
That's not what I mean. I'm saying we cannot even... by using the word heat, if you really look into it, if you want to say, but this is one and that is one. But heat, in fact, really isn't one.
Right.
Even though we can define it by one word, it doesn't mean that it is one.
Correct. So like I said...
So we don't have anything like that, which is what...
Correct. We have no definition of true singularity at all in our world. Yeah. But whatever we would think of as singular, even in the theoretical, is going to be a defined singularity. Whereas God's singularity is not defined singularity. It's because of the lack of definition that he's singular.
But that's what I'm saying.
Right?
The fact that
we only have things that are defined. We cannot do things that are not defined, right? So any singularity we have is going to be defined by other things. We know that already. We've established that every singularity we know of is a comprised, yes. But we're still making the theoretical point that even if you were to imagine a singularity that isn't defined by composites, it would still be stuck in the definition of singular. Because every time we use a definition, what we mean by that is to define it and say it's this and not that. Right? Any definition we use, even if we're going to extrapolate that it's an absolute singularity, not like the comprised singularity that we know of in our world, because we don't have any non-comprised singularity. But even if we were to imagine a non-comprised singularity, because of the way we exist, it would be a defined singularity. Because we use definitions, we use words, and we use definitions precisely for that, to say it's defined by this and not something else. So to say that about Hashem is a limitation. You're singular and not anything else. Excuse me, who said? So then why am I calling him singular? I'm calling him singular not because he's stuck in singular, but because he isn't stuck in anything, not even being stuck in singular. And that's why he's the true singularity, because he's not even stuck in being singular. This should blow your mind. It's mind-blowing every time you think about it. It's what is it? It's not a defined, it's not a positive definition. It's a negative definition.
So
Negative definition doesn't mean bad. Negative definition means it's not anything else.
It's not, so therefore.
So it's negative, meaning I'm describing it by what it's not by what it is. So when I say God is singular, I'm not describing God by what he is. I cannot do that. I'm describing by what he's not. He's not anything I can possibly define, is what I really mean when I say he's singular. Whereas, when I say in English, this is singular, what I mean is it's singular and not double. I mean it's this and not something else. So it's a positive definition that excludes all others. But when I say that God is singular, it's not a positive definition that excludes all others. It's a negative definition that excludes any definition.
Yes. So why do we have to even define him? Like, because we could never, even by saying he's singular, it's not even close to defining Hashem. So
again,
to say Hashem is Hashem. Like,
exactly. So we're pushing the limits of what we can understand, and pushing farther and farther. Right?
That was my question too.
Exactly. But singular that's a singular force like light that allows us to have vessels, we can kind of get that. We can get this idea of a singular light, singular force called light, that changes because of vessels. We can get that. But now that we saw the limitations of that, now we say, okay, God's beyond even that. So I only appreciate what I just said now because we spent the last 10 classes describing other things that we can understand. And now I could say, well, not even that definition, not even that definition. We're constantly pushing that. We're constantly pushing, not even that definition, not even that definition. And now we're saying, not even the definition of singularity. That singular light that shines, that changes because of what it bounces off, not even that. Because that's a singular definition that is positive to the exclusion of anything else. And when we say God's singular, it's not to the exclusion of anything else. It's to the exclusion of anything, period. Not even being singular. Okay?
I look at the world and I'm like, this is not a big deal for God to do. Like,
yes.
like,
Okay, so that's one of the practical.
You're making me feel like, I have to be so like, wow, God can do what He can do. Like, I'm like so special that like everything's so meaningful and whatever. But
so it's interesting. So this whole meditation, we're doing this in a meditation in a theoretical sense. Elsewhere in Chassidus, they'll take this meditation and bring it like to where it should lead to in your response. So sometimes that is the response. Once you understand the grandeur and the truth of God's absolute truth and how insignificant this whole reality is, then you don't get all bent out of shape when things don't go the way you want them to. The whole thing's nothing anyway. Oh, you can't do Torah mitzvahs because this and this happened. Really? It's a nothing. It's one of the results that come from this meditation. Okay, let's see inside.
But the opposite is also true.
So the other way around. Hashem chooses you, so, right? So depending on what you're trying to get to at the end, this meditation could lead to different conclusions based on what you're trying to get to on an emotional level. This is one of the
Conversation.
right. Sorry.
No, this is
Yeah,
this is
I'm
a
trying to-
conversation someone has in their mind. Like
Yeah.
Right, when you think
Yeah.
about
it's like more of a meditation. It's not
Yeah.
Correct.
I have to think about it as a meditation because otherwise, what would be the point of this discussion? Because in my head already,
Right.
Hashem is not defined. He is a singularity as much as he's a multiplicity, as much
Right.
as he's not.
Right.
a
We spoke about this
singularity,
at the beginning.
right?
I keep repeating this point, but a 2-year-old saying I don't understand math is very different than me saying I don't understand math. I don't. Math is way beyond me. Certainly advanced mathematics. So what's the difference between me and a 2-year-old? I'm at least wowed by the fact that I don't know math. The 2-year-old just is completely oblivious. So if I didn't learn anything and I just said, "Oh, God's beyond anything," what's your relationship with that?
No, but
Almost nothing. But when you learn all of this,
living it,
sorry.
but there's a way of living it and
Right,
acting
but
it, and that's
This is even more than that, which is now I have an active relationship with that infinite because I'm pushing the limits of what that is. I'm trying to understand
and meditating.
and thinking about it and trying to get to it closer. Okay, closer. Not really push further. Not really push further. Not really push further. So I'm developing actually a relationship with it.
This is putting words. It's
Correct.
putting Bina into Haamonas.
Into this. Okay, I could.
It's not that. So you can't actually.
Yeah, you could shut the book. God's the only reality. Close the book, and that's the end of it, right?
And you don't have a feeling, but you don't know how to put it on paper and anything. So this is basically taking your feelings and expressing it in words to make your feelings that much deeper.
That makes
So I
sense.
can
Yeah.
never explain how I learned this class.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
It takes a lot of time thinking about it. It's a lot of time in review.
it is. It's
Okay.
Yeah, I can never give over this class ever, and I'm really
Oy
good.
vey.
Like everyone asks me, I could always. But this class, sorry.
Okay,
It's
so
not
new
your
challenge.
problem,
No,
it's
new
my
challenge. At the end of the class, I'm going to try to give a recap that you can review, that you can share. All right. Okay, let's continue reading the top of the page. So, if so, because his singularity is not the kind of singularity that we know of, where it's locked into being that singular. Therefore, there's nothing that is apart from him, as opposed to our definitions. Every definition means to separate that thing from something else. So when I say this is singular, it's because I'm separating it from being multiple. But when I say God's singular, I'm not separating it from anything. And therefore, it can bring anything into being. Because nothing outside the purview of his capacity, not even the limitations of what singularity would mean. And this can be understood from that which we talked about from the Maharal, who told us that God's beyond all definition. Any possible definition is God's beyond. And now that Tzemach Tzedek is pushing that and saying, beyond the definition you gave it of this non-defined light. You, Maharal, who told us that God is non-defined light, I'm going to push it even farther and say he's beyond being in the non-defined light. Because non-defined light can't be multiple. It's only going to be light. That's it. Can't manifest into anything else. Morph into anything else. And therefore, nonetheless, but nonetheless, the reality is, again, reverse engineering based on what we know we have. If God were to create, without filtering, this non-defined infinite descriptor, then everything he produced, right, would also be infinite. So he first has to make himself finite, which he can totally do, and then create finitude. Thus the vessels. Right? And likewise, you'd have endless creation with no limitation. Because he is unlimited, non-defined, and infinite, and he's expressing himself infinitely, it would yield infinity. Right? And therefore that which is infinite and endless. When he decides that he wants to create that which is distinct, divided, multiple, singular, and defined, it would also could be infinite, if that's what it chose to do. Just as he himself is infinite. So he can produce infinity. Right? But as a matter of fact, reverse engineering. So he could have done that. He could have decided to create infinitely, no limitation, no constraint, and then have worlds that are infinite and no constraint. We don't know what that looks like because our worlds are definitionally constrained. But in theory, he's infinite. He could have produced that.
He's not infinite. He's
beyond infinite. And if he decides to choose his mode of expression to be infinite and infinite creation, then that's what's going to be result in infinite creation. But as a matter of reverse engineering, we see our world is not infinite. And therefore, he must have chosen to express non-infinite. Not because he had to. He didn't have to be any. Right? So, top of the left page. Considering that we observe creation being limited and measured and defined, there's dimension. In the Gemara says that it takes 100-year walk to go from the earth to the heaven. Whatever that means is not relevant. What's relevant is the acknowledgement that there's a limitation between the distance of heaven and earth. Right? And within our world, which itself is limited, there are limited, measured, defined creations that are distinct one from the other. So we must therefore conclude because he chose to invest himself via defined vessels. It's not that he had to have defined vessels for anything. It's reverse engineer. He's not there. He doesn't say this here right now, although it's going to come up perhaps later. The Kabbalists sometimes refer to God as the Yechelis. Yechelis means the capacity. The capacity. Without saying anything else. Right? What do they mean when they say the capacity? The words are shlilas kol hatarim, the negation of all definition. My capacity, whatever they are not negated by every definition. My capacities are very much defined. The capacity of my arm is going to be limited to movement, and the capacity of my mouth is going to be limited to speech. Right? The capacities are predetermined, right? Whereas Hashem is just the capacity. The capacity means there is nothing that can be said. There is nothing that can be said or not said of it. Nothing is negated from it. Everything, simultaneously, everything is negated from it. Every possible definition is negated, right? And therefore, there could have, in theory, been any version of the universe, including a universe that's unlimited. That very much could have been that. So all we know about Hashem is, and his choices to be whatever he is by reverse engineering what is. We see in reality a world that has kindness and strength, okay? Then he must have chosen to have kindness and strength and injected into creation. We see a world that has intelligence, okay? So he must have chosen to be intelligence and injected into creation. We see a world that's limited, so he must have, first of all, made himself limited and injected into creation. But not because, as we started out with, God had to do that in order to create multiplicity. No. It's only by dint of the fact that we see it is that way, we know he did it that way.
So how are you going to explain what we, in the world down here, define as negativity or evil? Because that element exists within the goodness. of that, the one who created by his
So
choice,
if there's
whatever. But
the way to put that would be is, considering that we see in the world extreme concealment on him, we must conclude that he imposed upon himself an extreme concealment. That's evil.
At that.
Evil is not created by something else. It's created by God, right? It's just extreme concealment. So considering we see in the world extreme concealment of God, we must conclude that he chose to impose upon himself an extreme concealment.
What does it mean by he chose to impose on himself? Like, why does he have to do that to himself?
You can't ask that question. You can only ask what his purpose is. Why he did it? Once you give a why, and it's not a free choice. He'd be compelled by a why.
But why
right?
do you have to say that? Why can't, like...
Because the reality is we see it. We see it, evil. Right? So if it's here, we have to reverse engineer that God put it there.
But why does he have to be that?
He chose to. I don't know.
But why can't he without being that?
I'm not
Sorry?
wrapping my head around him concealing.
It could not be.
Hashem is everywhere.
Again,
Right, but
we
I'm
can't.
not-
As soon as you give a why, this has to be there because of this.
Within himself.
So now God's compelled by that reason.
He created himself in that form, or like he chose.
To conceal.
To me, like the idea is like, you know, when
Let me
the
put it this way.
passages come out, they're like, I saw Hashem, and they weren't like the darkest, physically dark
Okay.
and dark place. And then like one thing that they discovered Hashem, like not they discovered, I'm saying they saw Hashem,
Whatever,
they
yeah,
felt it. It was I feel like Hashem is even in that darkness, and like that's what they were able to take out from there. Like I don't know, to me, like that's what I'm thinking.
Right. Well, that's right. That's a to use modern terminology, a lived experience of this notion that God is in concealment. Right?
Yeah.
The words I'm using is a philosophical thing. If you see it's here, if you see something is here, then it must be because God put himself into that thing.
Correct.
Otherwise it wouldn't exist. So if you see extreme concealment, it's because God chose to self-impose extreme concealment.
In
That's
that
it.
situation.
Yeah.
Correct. Otherwise, you're left with extreme concealment exists there, and it's being imposed on God?
No.
We can't do that,
What I'm
which
saying is
means-
that I know it exists because
Correct.
Hashem
So if it's
put
here,
it there.
that means he must have chosen to self-impose an extreme concealment. Otherwise, it would not exist. Right? That's an extreme concealment. But even the very fact that there's a limited world is already a concealment.
I got it.
See, we're looking at extreme concealment as being like this extremism, evil. You don't have to go that far. The table. The table is an extreme concealment on God. It really is. You look at the table, what does it tell you? The first thing it says, I take up space. Lie. Hashem is here. That's a concealment on God, right there. Just the universe. You don't have to go so far as evil. The very notion of the universe declaring that it takes up space and it has value is itself a lie. That's a concealment on God. You want to go farther back? The very fact that Chesed says, I'm valuable, Chesed of Atzilut, kindness of Atzilut, is also a lie. You're valuable, God's valuable. If it exists, Hashem chose to define himself as Chesed. Gotcha. Good, now I accept it. Right? So whatever the levels are, whatever the definitions are, on the most extreme evil to the most extreme sublime, if it's a definition, it's because Hashem chose to put that definition upon himself. Period. On the most sublime level, on the most extreme level.
But it's also with emotion. Like we, as emotional people, feel that evil is bad. So God doesn't have those feelings like we have. He chooses to have these feelings, but he has to be above these. So when you create a whole thing, he's not looking at it from our perspective within nature. He's looking from a completely different. So he has to be in everything, and it's not about emotion. It all comes back to the oneness, and we again define that oneness as good because we're limited to the nature of what it is. But his.
Yes, I want to finish this page before we go, but to address that question very quickly, or to that comment very quickly, in reality, the way to properly phrase the struggle between good and evil in the light of Chassidus is not really a struggle between good and evil per se. It's a struggle between revelation and concealment. It's all God. It's just a question of is it revealed or concealed? Another way to put that is, the question only is this item presenting himself truthful to the light that makes it? That's it. Is this item acting out in such a way that it reflects the truth of the light that created it?
So the answer is always yes.
Well,
Hashem chose for it to be that.
Yes, Hashem chose for it to present itself in such a fashion that's opposite to Hashem's will. Right? So it's presenting itself opposite to that which is giving it its being. That's a sin. Chesed of Atzilus never does that. It's always faithful.
Oh,
It's always
between the revealed and the not.
Exactly. The distinction between revealed and not revealed is this thing presenting itself in such a fashion that it is congruent. It's aligned with the energy that's currently creating it. Mitzvah versus sin. That's it. Not like we don't believe in devil and God. That's plurality. That's for other religions. For us, it's a singularity. Concealed, not concealed. That's the question. That all we're learning now is that at the top, this concealment begins in Hashem choosing to have definitions. And what we're learning here is the possibility for that to happen is because he himself is negated of all definition, even the definitions of what we think is singularity. Or another way to say that is, when we describe God as singular, it's not because he's locked in singular, but because he isn't defined by anything. Period. So he decides he's going to be in these definitions. Good, so he's in the definitions. That's it. And therefore, okay,
He's also
have
not in
to
those
pick up.
definitions.
Sorry?
He's also not in those definitions.
And also not in the definitions. And therefore now this is further to reconcile Rambam and Maharal. Of course God's in the definitions of intelligence, knowledge, and all the rest of it. And if when you tell God you are strong, you are wise, you are kind, not a lie, it's true. And you're also right, Maharal, that you're beyond all definition. And precisely because you're beyond all definition is why you can be in any definition. Because you're even beyond the definition of being non-defined.
What was the word again that they called him? Like that one word?
Yechilus. Capacity.
Capacity. So capacity is kind of like an action, like it's like a motion. I was thinking like he could be defined by the word ability. I guess the same way.
Same word, yeah. Ability. But I'll tell you why.
Capacity works better than ability. I'm just trying to say where is like, how do they get to that?
So let's get to this. Let's understand it. It's English word. I don't know if it properly translates to Hebrew, but the point of Yechilus is not that it's. Let's put it this way: a battery also has capacity, right? So it contains in it a measure of capacity and then produces it. So it's not as if God contains in himself a measure of capacity that happens to be infinite and then produces infinite. The capacity has no definition. That's why it's the capacity for all, because it has no definition. No definition whatsoever. And that's the true singularity. Not that it's defined by being singular, but that it has no definition. And because it has no definition, it could be absolutely any definition and still remain completely aloof from those definitions. So we're getting to the essence of reconciling Maharal and Rambam, that God is within all and completely transcendent of all simultaneously. And for the same reason. Because you're truly beyond all definition. And therefore you could be everywhere, anywhere, and in everything and defined by everything. Simultaneously. This has to blow your mind. It's mind-blowing. Even if you heard it once or 1,000 times, it's mind-blowing every time.
My mind around it in order.
Right?
I
I'll walk it through this way. I know, but I want let me give it. I want to build it up because let's start from the bottom.
Simple-minded, like
No. Start from the bottom and go upward. Let me start from the bottom and go upward, and we'll conclude with this. So let's just think like this. We ought to think, right? This is the way we think. That the more words we give to something, the bigger it becomes, right? So if I say that this car can drive fast, I just added something. It's good looking. I added something else. It's very comfortable. Added something else. It's got a starter. So the more words I give, the more things it has, the bigger the car becomes. Not physically bigger, it becomes more valuable. Because I added more words. Okay, that's the way we think of things. Because we're stuck in definitions.
The more space we give it.
So the more definitions we give it, the more space it has, the grander it is. The reality is the exact opposite. So imagine, I told you that there's an entity in my home. I gave one definition, that it's in my house, and you already know it's already limited to something that's the size of my house. So it can't be a building, it can't be a mountain, it can't be a tree. Just by giving one definition, I limited it from what it could possibly be. I said it's in my house. Then I say the entity in my house, well, it still could be a human, it could still be an animal, it could still be a rock, because I only gave one definition, entity, and it's in my house. Then I say the entity in my house is a vessel. I gave one more definition, and now I just banged out a billion more things. It can no longer be a food item, it can no longer be a human, it can no longer be an animal, it can't be a plant. By giving one more definition, I actually negated billions of more things. And then I say, the vessel in my house is a cup. Now I just threw out a bunch more, not a plate. So the more words I'm giving, the more I limit it to being that particular cup which has a scratch 2 inches up from the bottom right. So the more words I give it, actually limiting it more, not giving it more.
Okay.
I'm constraining it to being that one and nothing else.
Just got you.
Follow? So the more words you give something, so because we live in a world of definitions, we are prone to believing that the more defined something is, the greater it is, because now there's more stuff. When in reality, I'm limiting it to the thing that has that stuff and nothing else.
Less is more.
Right, exactly right. Less is more. So which is why, think of the language, God, we created something from nothing. What do you mean nothing? Wasn't there God here before creation? Why are you calling God nothing? Yes, I'm calling him no thing. Because as soon as I describe him as anything, now I just defined it. So yes, it's something, a bunch of something that are very specifically defined from nothing, non-definition. No thing. No particular thing. Right? So now what we're saying is that God being no particular thing is not even to be locked into the version of singularity that can't produce plurality. Not even that. So why am I calling God singular? I'm calling him singular because he isn't anything else. So it's not a positive term. You are singular and not something else. It's a negative term. You aren't anything, possibly anything other than a perfect, pure singularity. Because it's not defined by anything, not because it's defined by singularity. That's Yechilis. It's absolute capacity, defined by nothing. So if it produces everything, or produces nothing, changes nothing to its essential beingness. It just is. Finished. And therefore, that choice can mean that he's going to be defined by chesed, gvur, tiferet, by intelligence, by emotions, all the definitions we give of God. You are kind, you are wise. Because he's beyond all definition, including beyond the definition of being beyond definition, he can choose to be defined. Because why not? Who told him not?
And yet has this insane beyond belief ability.
And both of them remain.
Both
remain
singular
true.
has this ability to create everything that's been
Right?
created.
Because it's not even locked to being singular. Okay? So now we're approaching farther, as we're going to see next week, the meshing between Maharal and Rambam. We started out with the polar opposites. Either God's defined by being one with his capacities, or God's beyond all capacities. And now both are true. Because you're actually even beyond. So in other words, when Maharal said that God's beyond all definition, Tzemach Tzedek's pushing it even farther and saying, yeah, you're right, God's beyond all definition, including the definition you just gave him that he's beyond definition. Because you defined him as being beyond definition, and therefore he cannot be one with his wisdom. And I'm saying, well, actually, that's the definition you just gave, and using your logic, he's beyond that too. And therefore, could be one with his intelligence as per Rambam. It's mind-blowing. It should blow your mind, even if you read it 1,000 times. Okay, God willing, more next week.
Yes.
Thank you.